Hi everyone, and welcome again to Yesterday Today Sewing, where I take the patterns of years past and adapt them and sew them and add to my current everyday wardrobe. My last few projects that I've done for this channel have really been around late Victorian Edwardian time projects, and I'm thinking it's time to move forward. One of my favourite periods in clothing history is the 1930s. There's something about that long line, beautiful cuts that I really love. I also managed to pick up a rather lovely rayon when I was at Spotlight picking up other laces, which I can't show you now because I've just washed it and it's trying to dry in surprisingly damp weather that we've had at the moment. So I'll show you that rayon when I get around to making the dress. But in the interest of thinking about the layers that are going to go underneath this dress, I thought maybe it's time to give this slip a go. So I don't have this pattern. I don't know where to get this pattern. I have absolutely nothing like it in my pattern stash, which means I'm going to have to try and draft something like this from scratch. Should be easy. We'll see. Wish me luck. To get me started, I used a Vogue fitting shell pattern, and once I'd traced that out, tried to work out what sort of neckline I wanted, about where the strap should sit. And then in order to give the underbust line, I joined that dart and tried to figure then the sort of line from sort of your mid-chest area down to the waistline at the side and just give it a nice slope. I don't have any French curves or anything like that to use, so I just kind of gave it the best guess, kept going until I had a line that I wanted, cut it out. That will get attached to the top of the skirt, and then I just wanted to distribute the fullness to make the gathers under the bust. So I took out the dart under the arm and put a few slashes to sort of distribute that fullness evenly around under there. So hopefully that will work. A bit of paper underneath helps to bring it all together. And that is the bodice top, with Laurie making life difficult, of course, as she always does when I'm trying to do work. Look, I know drafting's not everyone's cup of tea, so if you are really interested in how I did the draft, look below, head to my blog. I'll make sure I've put all of that information down there for you. Okay, so what I've realised is I really have no idea what I've been doing and what I am doing, but I do have something to try. I now have, this is the bodice front piece. It will gather along this edge here. Strap will come off of here. I have here we go. So that's the skirt front piece with the bodice attaching there and the full skirt there. So you need one of those. And I have two of these back pieces which will overlap, join at the waist here with a tie. At this side I'll have to put a little buttonhole so that one of the cords can come through for tying. So it might work, it might be a little bit full, it might be completely wrong, I don't know. What I've got to decide now is how I do it. Do I do a mock-up out of calico, or do I just go straight to the rayon that I'm planning to use? Because truth is, the rayon was really pretty cheap. See, if I don't like it, I could always just turn it into a petticoat, cut the top off and just use the skirt of it. So it wouldn't be wasted. What should a person do? Just jump out in trust and hope for the best with fingers crossed, knowing that if disaster strikes, you've got a backup plan and it becomes a petticoat. I think that's tending to tell me just jump in and hope for the best. Try it on the rayon. Get ready for a disaster video, huh? Yep, I'm doing it on the rayon. Okay, so here we go. It is all pinned out. As I was worried about, I had nowhere near enough to do it on the bias, especially for as full as I've made this. So I've even had to do it on the cross grain because I couldn't get it all to fit otherwise. As it is, I will be cutting out the straps, possibly even joining them midway out of that little bit there at the bottom of that skirt, maybe a little bit along that edge there. You might be able to get the shoulder straps out from over there. But anyway, I've managed to get them all on a grain, and the same grain for all of them. So yeah, now to cut it out, see what happens. Exciting. Right, so that was me forgetting to turn on the camera while I cut out, but that's neither here nor there really. You've seen me cut out before, nothing remarkable there. What it does remind me of is what rayon is like. It really is slippery, it likes to move, it pulls if you're trying to cut out on a smaller table. I was trying to trace the extra seam allowance on with tailor's chalk, and it really loved moving while I did that. So my seams are not always quite 1.5 centimetres because the tailor's chalk just kept moving the material while I tried to draw on it. So it is not as perfect as I would like, but hey, maybe it'll all come out in the wash. It does remind me though that often when you're working with rayon, it's probably worth using a rotary cutter. I do have one, but I don't have a big enough surface to rotary cut a whole pattern on. Add the seam allowances to your pattern so you don't have to try and do it while you cut and trace that extra. And use very fine pins as well. But it's reminding me I do need to change my needle in my machine and try and get quite a nice fine needle when it comes to sewing this as well. While I'm thinking about that, I'm also thinking about what seams I'm going to use. Certainly for the side seams and where I can, I'll do a French seam, because again this will be nice and fine and then it'll be nice and strong. But for this one where it's gathered on the bust, I won't be able to do that. This might be a case for the overlocker, I think, to at least do those ones. Those edges I will just turn, but anyway, I think that's probably enough for today, and I will see you again tomorrow when I keep going with this. So next morning, first thing is the joy of stay stitching. With all these curved edges, both at the top of the skirt and around the neckline and armhole, rayon is just too inclined to stretch. So stay stitching helps, and as always, you tend to go from the widest part to the narrowest part when you do your stay stitching, which means going from the outside in on these seams. And yeah, did it on all the bodice top. After running a few gathering stitches in the bodice bust area, it's now just a matter of gathering those up and getting them pinned to the bodice itself. I'll actually sew the centre front of that bust piece afterwards. I think it's going to be easier to put it on the skirt in 2 separate pieces and then sort of join them in the middle afterwards. And look, that seemed to work. It was not too dramatic at all. Don't you love it when things work? There we go. And now it's that perennial question, how do I finish my seams? Now I was thinking I could just overlock, and yes, that would be the easy way to do it, but you know, I am trying to do something different. I am trying to finish my things really beautifully, and I was planning on doing most of this with a French seam, but with the curve on this piece, French seams just really don't work. Hang on, what have I done there? Oh, I'm going to have to unpick. I've caught it all wrong. Look at this. Look at this. Doing it far too quickly. Can you see that? There. I have caught the underside of the curve wrong and I'm going to have to unpick. What a pain. Anyway, I'll do that in a moment. But back to the seam finishing. Can't French seam, but I do remember some time back, I think when I was doing my wedding dress, doing a mock French seam, because that too had curves, and that finished it really beautifully. Now it could be a little annoying with the gathers, and I may end up hand stitching that to bring it together, but it's really pretty simple. Basically, you open out the seam and then fold that half into the middle, fold that half into the middle, and then bring them together, and then you can either machine stitch the fold together, or I might just do a little whip stitch to hold that together, because it's really not a very long seam and it won't take me long to do that little bit of hand stitching, and I think that'll finish it off really nicely. But before we do that, I'm gonna fix this little boo-boo. Where would we be without quick unpicks, I ask you? So look, the black on black might be slightly hard to see, but for the most part she seems to fit. I must admit the padding I've put on there is not quite right for the bust, so it never quite sits right, but the back certainly seems to fit. I think it would have been a lot nicer if I'd been able to cut it on the bias. Certainly the way some of this would have sat would be quite different, but again, I think once I get the bands on and everything. So at this stage, I think I'm happy to leave it like that. I am thinking, rather than rolling the edge and hemming it, I might even either get some satin bias binding and bind the edge, or cut some. Now I won't have enough of this if I want to cut it on the cross, but if I'm making a narrow binding, I could probably get away with it just as is, but I would have to see if I've got enough of it. Otherwise, I could make the straps and the binding out of a different black. If I've got a nice shiny satiny black, that might give it a really nice highlight. So anyway, I'll have a look through my stash, I'll see, and I'll decide. But I think at this stage, that's looking like it should be a good enough fit to get away with for this. So on to the binding. So I went out into Little House Out Back to see what fabric I had sitting around that might be of use for the binding for this slip. And one thing I found was some velveteen, and I thought, oh, that could look rather nice with some sort of velvet edging. The velveteen, however, was a bit too thick. Perhaps if I had like a velvet ribbon to do the edging with, that might have worked, but I don't have that, so that wasn't going to happen. But what I then did find is this polyester satin. It's exceedingly plastic, but I think just for the binding, that should work. And truth is, if I was going to be buying the pre-made bias binding to do on the edge, it'll be polyester anyway. So I think this will work. And work it did. Here we've got almost finished. Just got to finish the hem, but you can see the bias around the hem. Those beautiful gathers at the bust line. Here we are at the back. Just got to sew the strap on now that I've got the right length. You can see on the side here I've put a little buttonhole in so the strap can come through on the wrap bit. But I am really impressed with how beautifully this sits and how lovely it's come up with that bit of satin as well. So now that I've straightened off the hem, I can sit on the train, sew up that hem, sew that strap on, and we are good to go with my lovely new 1930s slip. And here is my lovely slip in all its glory. It is really comfortable to wear. It's easy to put on, easy to wear. I can't love it enough, and it works so beautifully under so many pieces of clothing. I sometimes wonder if this wouldn't be worth making as a simple day dress to wear around the house, especially if it was in a beautiful printed rayon. Probably the only thing that might stop me is that lower back to it, but apart from that, it is lovely. So anyway, thank you for joining me on my 1930s wrap slip project, and join me again for a whole heap more sewing projects that I've got going. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye for now.